normally happen on a night just like this. They come from nowhere and frighten normally sane people almost to death. First it's spacecraft with strange lights in the night sky, then weird creatures on the ground with odd-shaped heads bathed in brilliant light. Aliens, beings from outer space. Do they really exist? Well, some of the greatest academics in the world say yes. So too do ordinary people, people who have seen them. What you are about to experience is all true. Abducted by aliens. Would you tell anyone? Could you face the ridicule, the mocking, the whispers? Most people would say you'd gone mad. That could have happened to Andrew if scientists hadn't said his story was quite feasible.
February 1992. That evening was something of which I will never forget. I was very restless. In fact, I couldn't get to sleep. Consequently, from there on in, I must have dozed off. But what happened from there on in, I really don't know how it happened, but it happened.
According to Andrew, what happened was this. Suddenly, he was awake. Somehow, he had been transported and was standing in this car park outside a basketball stadium. A stadium that's located 50 kilometres from his home on the outskirts of Perth. He had no idea how he got there, but he did know he was not alone. He was surrounded by more than 30 strangers.
I turned to this person alongside me and I said, "Where am I? What am I doing here?" This person looked at me and without using the spoken word, just said virtually through my mind, "You're lucky to be chosen." And this blue light appeared from such a small dot and got larger and larger until finally it intensified to such magnetism that it was virtually over the top of us, and a brilliant white flash is all I recall. The very next thing was I was inside this basketball hall.
Andrew's confusion turned to fear. Again, he was not alone, but now there was something sinister about his companions.
They took on a human-like figure. The thing that distinguished them most of all, that were different from humans, were their eyes. Their eyes were, to me, they resembled as if they were out of focus.
My first impressions, formed over several hours, were that the chap in question is definitely sincere and seems convinced that what he experienced actually happened.
Professor John Frodsham from Murdoch University in Perth is president of the Australian Society of Psychical Research. He's investigated many cases of this kind and has conducted lengthy interviews with Andrew and his family.
I must say that I hadn't encountered anything quite like this before, because although abduction cases now are becoming 10 a penny, or a dime a dozen, there are very few of them in which the abductee is transported, as our case alleged he was transported, from one locality to another.
But Andrew says this was not his first encounter, nor was it to be his last.
When I was 7 years old, they had been to see me before and they had given this gift to me.
The gift was a cricket bat, and memories of that childhood experience flooded back to him 34 years later as he stood in the basketball stadium.
The whole place was abuzz. The lights were on. Everything was happening. and I noticed people were receiving gifts from these things. One of them came over to me and offered me a gift. I looked at it and I thought to myself there and then, what is this? As I looked down towards what I was given, it was a cricket bat.
Was it a reminder of the previous visit? Andrew says he doesn't know because of what happened next.
There was one of these things kneeled down, accepting my emotions, my feelings, everything that I was feeling. It was accepting and drawing in, as if it was robbing me, depriving me of my own thoughts. I felt aggravated, I felt violated, I became very angry. And consequently, I dropped the gift that I was given. I looked over towards the others and I said, this is not what it seems. Get out of here. I got to the exit doors within the hall and everything just went brilliant white. The next thing I remember, I was back on my bed to where I must have dozed off asleep, and the first thing that I remembered was that waking up and seeing the time. It was 2:15 a.m.
But Andrew's story doesn't end there. Exactly a month later, at 2:30 a.m. on March the 4th, 1992, he was jolted out of his sleep by an intense blue light. Through the glare, he saw someone or something.
It was definitely a figure. It stood approximately 4 foot, maybe 4'6" high, no taller. What was incredible was the fact that my son was being guided down the passageway by this thing. It was at this point that I noticed that my body was paralyzed. My mind was completely functional, but my body wouldn't respond. It was only when this blue misty-like figure had disappeared from my sight did I gain the strength enough to be able to get off the bed and go and grab my son.
Andrew says that's when the figure vanished in a flash of white light. The next thing he remembers is finding his 10-year-old son tucked up in bed, safe but very pale and shaken. The boy was well enough to go to school next morning, but not long after, there was another mysterious problem.
We were sitting down eating a lamb roast, and consequently what had happened was we'd just all finished our dinner, and my son had an irritation at the back of his throat.
And this is what he coughed up when he cleared his throat. Andrew's theory is that the tiny metal object could have been implanted in the boy by the strange nocturnal visitor on March the 4th.
If it should turn out to be made of an unusual metal, an unusual alloy, let's just say an alloy which is not encountered here on Earth, then of course we have a very strong lead indeed.
Well, we've since had the object tested by experts at Curtin University in Perth. These are photographs of it taken under a powerful spectrograph. And the university's verdict? The object is most likely a computer component manufactured in Sweden. That verdict aside, Andrew stands by his story and adds one final twist. He says his two children sighted unidentified flying objects hovering near their house back in March 1992. And he's worried that for his family, the story is far from over.
I feel a lot of fear. I fear the fact that I don't know what I'm dealing with here. I feel they're coming back. They are coming back. They told me they'd be back in 5 of our Earth years. 5 years was the time at which they'll come back and they'll see my son again. Against my wishes, there is nothing I can do. I feel completely helpless. There's no one I can turn to. There's no one I can trust.
Many sightings are those of a single nature. That is, one person seeing something he or she can't explain. Often they're dismissed as imagination. But when 4 people see the same thing, describe the same craft, experience the same fear, the subject takes on a frightening new dimension.
"4:30 a.m.
It's definitely what you'd say is a UFO. It was an unidentified flying object. Never seen anything like it in my life.
In the early hours of that July morning, the women were on their way home after a reunion with old friends. They were tired, but it was only a 15-minute drive. Tina and Grace were in the front, Joy and Victoria in the back. Grace was driving. Suddenly, her attention was diverted from the road ahead. About their ordeal and want their identities kept secret.
You didn't know what to think of it at first because it was multicolored. It had lots of lights and it went like a strobe light would go, and it had incredible movement in the sky, and there was nothing that would move around like it ever.
They asked me what I thought it was. I said it's a star, but it was moving, so it couldn't have been a star. So I thought maybe it's a satellite. And being sceptic, I didn't want to think what they were thinking. So in the end I said, well, I won't believe it unless it's on my tail.
As it turned out, prophetic words indeed. Grace put her foot down, tried to outdistance the lights.
And I was the first one to turn around, and it was like a sunset, orange, huge, that was hovering behind the car.
The back of the car was just lit up so brightly, which then I turned around and there was this huge, bright, sort of like the sun. It was so bright. And I just was overwhelmed with fear, which then I turned to Grace and I said, step on it, let's get out of here.
They thought safety was in sight. A parking lot, deserted, dark, but not for long.
I had slammed my hand onto the security lock to lock all the doors, but it was too late because Joy had jumped out of the car and gone to the back of the car to see where it had gone.
All of a sudden this thing was over the top of us, and it was just huge, and it hovered.
And you didn't have to stretch your neck or look very high up or anything like that. It would have only been as high as a telegraph pole.
They were afraid, very afraid. Strange lights, obviously following them, harassing them. Why?
Grace was upset and made us get back in the car. She was really scared, so we all got back in the car. And then we went to drive off. And that's when we noticed about 5 or 6 other things in the sky. But they were heaps smaller, real small.
Grace accelerated. The lights did too. It seemed there was no escape. Until, at last, they came to a driveway. A farmhouse. The lights, the craft on their tail. Frantic, Grace honked the car horn. No response. Nothing. The 4 women were alone.
And then 2 lights sort of come from the left. It looked like they landed. And they were pretty close, but there was a lot of trees sort of on the boundary of the property. The girls in the front, that's when they said, did you see that?
Their worst fears were about to be confirmed. A shadow fell across the blinding lights. A figure appeared, coming closer and closer. A silhouette, almost human, but not quite. Weird, ominous.
Just what impressed me was that it was so little. It was no more than 3 or 4 foot, and it looked like a little person.
And that is all they remember, that figure advancing toward them.
Like a shadow came over it, and it was like it was just gone. You couldn't see it. I just started that car up, and I reversed it out so fast and just took off like crazy.
The lights disappeared, and the 4 women thought the nightmare was over. But it was just beginning. First, the mystery of the missing time. It was now 6 a.m. and they'd set out at 4:30.
You know, I mean, it's a 15-minute drive at the best of times, and even if you know, with the stops that we made and you allowed, you know, a couple of minutes here or there, you could account for a half an hour, but you can't account for an hour and a half.
What happened to the 4 women during that missing hour? Where did the lights, the craft, the figure come from? They are questions which remain unanswered.
It wasn't a plane. It definitely wasn't a plane. It was just too low. A plane would have dropped out of the sky. Too big.
I definitely think I saw a craft. I definitely think I saw a little person from one of those.
That frightening night would not be put to rest. It would return to haunt each of the 4 women. There were the after effects: migraine headaches, nosebleeds, dizzy spells, and, in Grace's case, terrifying flashbacks.
I found it very hard to sleep. There was times that I sensed, don't ask me how because I really don't know, but I just knew there was something in my room. And this went on for quite a time. It got to a stage where I just didn't want to go to bed. I didn't want to sleep because I was so scared.
Grace dreaded being at home, alone. There was that uneasy feeling that she was under surveillance, being watched. Just a feeling, nothing tangible, until...
Little white, bright, practically even like a bluey haze around them, light that was moving around on the wall. And I'd sort of get up and go and touch something to sort of see if I could get a reflection, if it was something, always to see what could this be, but it was nothing. It'd sort of move about frantically and then disappear.
Grace felt isolated. There was no one she could turn to, no one except her 3 friends. Several weeks after the first encounter, they gathered at Tina's house. That was when the lights appeared again. Tina drew the blinds, refusing to believe the worst, that it was all about to begin again.
We thought, well, we didn't know where they came from, but we just sort of watched them with the blinds down, sort of when they blended together, asked them to move around in certain directions just to see if they, you know, whatever it was would do it, and it did. The lights moved around in whatever direction you told it to go into, whether it was up and down or right and left or, you know, it didn't matter. You know, jump to the other wall, it just did.
This went on for about, you know, a couple of minutes, and then it just disappeared. It was completely gone.
Grace, by now, was on the brink. It seemed there was nowhere left to hide. Wherever she turned, the lights were there, taunting her, tormenting her, even as she drove through the suburbs.
I noticed the same light, the blue light around it. I noticed this thing in the sky, and I mean, my heart started pounding like mad, and I was really scared. I wanted to turn around and go back, but at that stage I thought, if I go back, my husband's going to think, you know, you really lost it. It was as if this thing was following me. That's the way I felt. I mean, that's just the way I felt, you know.
Back home that night, Grace was calmed by her husband. The family settled down, tried to sleep, and then...
At about 12:15, my son woke me, stood beside my bed, and he was beside himself, and he was crying and shouting. And I was like, what's wrong with you? And he was saying, there's somebody in my room. I was screaming for you, so you didn't come.
Raced up out of bed and sort of went down to his room and had a look at all the rooms. I thought maybe there's someone in the house, you know, an intruder or something. And raced down, had a look at all the rooms, and nothing there, nobody there.
A moment of peace, but a new terror was about to descend.
I watched this thing come across the roof of our room, hovering over us. I was screaming at my husband to get out of the bed because I said to him, that's the thing that was that night that chased us. It was exactly the same ship.
She said, that's it. I said, what are you talking about? Just go back to bed.
But Grace persuaded her husband to come to the window to see for himself. At first, he could not believe his eyes.
It wasn't an airplane. I know what airplanes look like. I mean, I've lived near airports. I've flown a fair bit. You know, you hear the sound. There's no way this thing just travels so slow and so low that it's an airplane.
Obviously, it had been above my home, and what made me more upset that it was starting to affect my children, and I had no control on it, none at all. You think that being a mother you could protect your children, but I couldn't.
That was the last encounter, the last time any of the women saw those lights. The creature that confronted them that night in July 1994 never reappeared. But the mystery remains, and so do the nagging fears. No one has been able to give a satisfactory explanation. All four women are convinced they've been stalked by a UFO. They all know what they saw. It actually happened. And Grace's husband, he didn't believe the story at first. Now, he's a believer too.
They are about the place. And I thought then I can accept the fact that yes, you know, I've seen it with my own eyes, and you know, and now they are there. Yeah.
As for the women, they can only hope that their days and nights of terror are over.
I never believed in them, you know. They were just something out of a science fiction thing. You would never believe it until you've seen it. But I know differently now. I know that they do exist, and I believe it now because I know what's happened to us.
Out here at night, things happen that most people never know about. Lights glow, weird noises come from nowhere, and things vanish without trace. Other things appear, like strange crop circles, and no one knows how or why.
You can see them. You can even touch them. They've been appearing in England for almost a century, but no one has been able to explain them. Swirling circles, intricate geometric designs on a grand scale that cut a swathe through vast areas of cropland. Theories abound. Meteorological forces, messages from out of space, a man-made hoax. All have been investigated, but the mystery of the crop circles remains as unfathomable as ever. And now, from outback Australia, another clue in this intriguing puzzle. These sounds were recorded in the very centre of one Australian crop circle, far from cities and from civilization. This is the first time they've been broadcast anywhere in the world. And even though the experts have played them over and over, fed them through computer after computer, analysed them and reanalysed them, the secret of these sounds has never been unlocked.
The difference between England and Australia is that our areas are totally remote.
John Ockertell, a commercial airline pilot, is one of Australia's leading researchers in this highly specialised field. He's seen the circles, heard the sounds, and investigated them thoroughly.
The main patterns we get in Australia are basically a complete flattening of the ring. In other words, the whole central process, the whole ring is completely flattened in either an anti-clockwise circle or a clockwise circle. Also, you'll find a star pattern. You'll have a large one in the centre, and to the outside extremes you'll have 4 small ones. So there's symmetry involved.
John Ockertell is no newcomer to this research. He's been there since the beginning. The first circle was discovered in Australia in 1940. In the last 50 years or so, hundreds of crop circles have appeared in Australia, all of them in this remote 10,000 square kilometre area around the borders of New South Wales, South Australia and Victoria.
Out here it's hot, it's dry, it's wheat country, right in the middle of nowhere. Just over that way is what they call the big desert wilderness. The nearest real town is 2 hours that way. This part of Australia is known as sunset country because of the red sandy soil. The white man found it hard to tame, but Aboriginal tribes have roamed here for 40,000 years. It's a land of legends and mystery, none more intriguing than the mystery of the crop circles.
It's a mystery that crept into the lives of Rex and Nance Jolly in 1989. They're no-nonsense, hard-working country folk who have worked on the land all their lives. In the summer of '89, all their gambles and their toil was about to pay off. As far as the eye could see was the season's bumper wheat crop, ready for the harvest to begin.
When we hired the contractors to come in to strip our wheat, they'd stripped quite a few acres, and then this morning they were sailing along down a rise, and they could see ahead of them these things that they'd never seen before.
Those things the contractor saw from his harvester were strange circles, perfect shapes, imprinted on the wheat fields. His first reaction was to call Nance and Rex.
He just said, "You've got to do something about this. It's once in a lifetime you'd see something like this." But we were amazed and didn't know what to do, we didn't know what we were looking at.
When they regained their composure, the first thing the Jollies did was take these photographs. The second was contact the expert, John Ockertell, who set off immediately for Sunset Country.
What we discovered was 11 rings. They were in a half-moon shape. The largest were at the top of the ridge, away from the homestead. And as you walked closer towards the homestead and the fence, the rings got consequently smaller.
John Ockertell found that the wheat itself was not damaged in any way. The stalks were not broken, just bent at the base. Somehow, they'd been woven into an intricate pattern, something like a straw basket. As for the soil around the circles, it was sandy and soft as normal. But inside the circles, the soil was very different indeed. It was as hard as a rock. It was tough work taking soil samples. In fact, they had to use a crowbar to prise them free. The samples were sent off to Monash University in Melbourne for analysis. At first, the results did not look that promising. The soil was unusually high in iron oxide, but it didn't contain any strange elements. Then the researchers found a clue that sent them back to their computers for another look.
What we found was there was very little bacterial life, which is very unusual in soil. In the ring section, in the normal soil, there's a lot of normal bacterial life.
And there was more. The university computers revealed that there was an unexplained magnetic charge emanating from one corner of the farm, right where the circles had formed. Armed with this new information, John Ockertell headed back to the Jollies wheat field. He pinpointed the exact spot and began a new series of tests.
What we found was a ring. It looks like a coiled snake with a bit of a head on it, and it was very magnetised to the extent where if you ran a normal compass, which is very unusual, over it, it would swing the compass needle.
To this day, John Ockertell can't explain that magnetic charge. It, like the crop circles, remains a mystery. But there was to be one further piece of evidence that would prove even more mysterious. Another local farmer had noticed his sheep refused to go anywhere near one of the circles. And when he went to investigate, he heard a strange noise. A noise that literally made him sick. That farmer had the presence of mind to record the sound. What he captured on tape was this. The sound we played you earlier.
We then got that tape and went ahead and analysed, and what they did, they scrubbed all the machine noises and the noises on the tape, and they discovered there's a frequency of 5.12 kilohertz.
When John Ockertell studied the computer breakdown of the sound, there was another surprise, another discovery. The sound reminded him of one recorded by a BBC television crew while they were filming at the site of a crop circle in England.
A BBC crew attached a radio microphone to Pat Delgado. As he walked in the circle, it picked up mysterious sounds.
No, it's here. That's a terrible noise, just as you stand in the centre. You getting a noise there, Richard? Very, very bad indeed. Yeah, I can hear it here. I can feel it here. This is our old friend back. It is. Yeah. Is it a pulse? It's like, I think it's about here. An electronic sparrow, really, is the best description. That's it. That's it, yeah. Yeah. This is the same noises we're having analysed in Sussex now. Just in the centre of the circle.
Now the funny thing is that our sound is in the same range as the one that was discovered in England, so it's maybe very important.
But there's more to the Sunset Country mystery than strange, unexplained noises and circles that appear out of nowhere. It happened on a night just like this, 15 years ago. The sky was still and crystal clear. As usual, Eric Wilson and his two daughters were relaxing in front of the TV after a hard day's work on the farm. Their peace was about to be disturbed.
The dog started to make a very peculiar whining and howling noise. It was, well, I hadn't heard before, and I haven't heard it since, actually. I came outside to investigate what the problem was and saw this light above, over the dam.
Girls, come and look at this!
Eric's daughter, Jeanette, recalls that this blinding light shone over the farm for a minute or two.
We could see this object hovering in the sky with a flashing light on the top and a dome across the other side of the dam bank.
Then, just as suddenly as the light and the object appeared, they simply disappeared. The Wilson family reported the sighting to the police, who did make some inquiries. It wasn't the first, nor the last such sighting in Sunset Country. So, is there a link between the lights and the circles? Some say it's just too much of a coincidence. There has to be a connection. But in the realms of science, there's no such speculation. Even though most down-to-earth theories, too, have been discounted. They've said no to vortex wind drafts and whirlwinds because the wheat plants have not been damaged in any way. No to plasma balls and fireballs because there's no evidence of charring or burning. And no to animals because there have never been tracks leading to or from the circles. So, maybe there's only one way left to end the guessing game.
We're hoping in the future, we've got equipment up there at the moment, and last year, for instance, we had equipment available where we were hoping to see one formed or see the process. Once we get to see the process occurring, then we may be able to put a theory to it.
Until that day, one thing is a scientific certainty. Crop circles do exist. They have appeared in many countries: England, the United States, Canada, and Australia. The only problem is, we still don't know who or what is creating them.